This is the story of Aaron Miller and his wife Jessica Miller. They had built their marriage the way most people build things they believe will last. Carefully at first, then by habit, then by assumption. Aaron was a man who measured his love in consistency, the coffee made before she woke, the remembered anniversaries, the small adjustments he made to himself over the years without ever naming them as sacrifices. Jessica was warm, magnetic, the kind of woman who filled a room without trying, and who had learned, somewhere along the way, that her warmth could also be wielded. The trouble with their marriage was not that love had left. It was that love had slowly been rearranged into something that only resembled itself. And like most quiet disasters, neither of them noticed the rearranging until the structure had already shifted beneath their feet. The party was at the Hendersons' house on Maple Creek Drive, which meant it was the kind of gathering where the wine was decent and the conversations eventually circled back to mortgages and school districts. Aaron had been to enough of these to know where he'd end up. Near the kitchen island, nursing a drink, occasionally laughing at something Marcus Henderson said about fantasy football. He didn't mind. He had long since made a quiet peace with being the kind of husband who was pleasant in company without being the center of it. Jessica, by contrast, was the center of most rooms she entered, and he had loved that about her once with an uncomplicated pride. He still loved it, or something in the neighborhood of it. But love that has become habitual is harder to locate than love that is new. It sits somewhere between affection and duty, which is not the same thing as fading, but is not entirely different either. He saw her across the room, talking to Daniel Marsh. Daniel had been in their extended circle for about 8 months, ever since he started dating a woman named Claire, who worked with Jessica. He was tall, attentive in the way that men are when they are new to a group and trying to make an impression. He laughed at things just before they were quite finished, which Aaron had noticed once, and filed away without comment. What Aaron noticed that night was simpler and harder to articulate. The way Jessica touched Daniel's forearm when she laughed. It was brief. It was probably nothing. People touched each other's arms at parties. He was not the kind of man who tracked his wife's arm like a territorial animal, or at least he had never thought of himself that way. But the touch landed somewhere in his chest, with a faint weight he couldn't quite shake loose. He went back to talking to Marcus. Later, when a slow song came on, ironic, Aaron thought, because nobody at this kind of party actually danced. Daniel held out a hand toward Jessica with a theatrical, self-aware bow, and she laughed and took it. They swayed in the small clearing between the sectional and the bookshelf, and it was casual, and it was nothing. And Aaron stood there with his glass and felt something tighten at the base of his throat. He waited until they were home. He was careful about it. He chose his words the way he chose most things, deliberately, without wanting to seem unreasonable. They were in the kitchen, Jessica pulling off her earrings, and he said, as gently as he knew how, "I'd prefer if you didn't dance with Daniel." It made me uncomfortable. He had expected at minimum to be heard. What he got instead was a beat of silence, and then Jessica's smile. Not a cruel smile, but a smile with edges. And she said, "Aaron, oh my God." Her voice had that particular lightness that people use when they are signaling that you are being absurd. We were literally swaying. It was like a middle school thing. "I know. I'm just telling you how I felt. It's Daniel. He's Claire's boyfriend. I know who he is." She shook her head, still smiling, and went upstairs. He stood in the kitchen for a moment that stretched. Then he rinsed his glass, turned off the light, and followed her. He did not bring it up again that night. 3 days later, they were at brunch with 2 other couples, the Franklins and Rhea and Gabe. And Jessica, describing the party, said, "Aaron got jealous because I danced with Claire's boyfriend for literally 45 seconds. She said it with the particular warmth of someone sharing a charming, slightly ridiculous anecdote. The table laughed. Someone said, "That's kind of sweet, actually." Someone else said, "Classic Aaron." Jessica smiled at him across the table with a look that said, "See, they think it's sweet. Don't make a thing of it." Aaron smiled back. He understood in that moment that what had happened in the kitchen had not been a private exchange between 2 people trying to understand each other. It had been collected, filed, and now deployed, gently, publicly in a way that was hard to name without sounding petty. He ate his eggs. He laughed when it was expected. He kept the thought folded small and placed it somewhere in the back of his mind, where things go when you are not yet ready to look at them directly. October came, and with it the particular quality of light that Aaron had always associated with introspection, low and amber, slanting through the kitchen window in the late afternoon, making ordinary things look more meaningful than they were. He had started working from home 2 days a week, which meant he was in the house during hours when he had previously only known it as a place he returned to. Now he knew its rhythms, when the furnace cycled, which drawer stuck, the way the afternoon silence had a texture to it. He also noticed when Jessica wasn't in it, not in any literal sense. She was there mostly. But there is a difference between presence and inhabiting a space, and Jessica had begun, without announcement, to inhabit it less. Her evenings were fuller. The book club had added a second meeting night. She joined a fitness class on Thursdays. He had no objections to any of these things individually. It was only when he placed them side by side, like photographs from different years, that he could see the cumulative migration. He mentioned it once, obliquely. Feels like we haven't had a night in together in a while. Jessica was on her phone. What's tonight? Wednesday. I'm here tonight. Right. He paused. I meant more generally. She looked up then. Her expression was patient in the way that patience can sometimes resemble condescension. Aaron, I'm right here. I'm always here. I have things going on. That's allowed. Of course it is. Are you being passive-aggressive right now? No. I'm trying to have a conversation. Okay, so have it. She set her phone down with a kind of careful deliberateness that meant she was performing attentiveness. I'm listening. He looked at her. He thought about saying, I feel like I'm a peripheral character in your life, and I'm not sure when that happened. He thought about saying, when I told you something bothered me, you turned it into a party anecdote. He thought about saying, I miss you, and I'm not sure you've noticed. What he said was, never mind, it's fine. She picked her phone back up. He recognized this pattern, had recognized it for months. The way certain conversations became impossible not because of what was said, but because of the atmosphere that preceded them. Raising something real with Jessica had started to feel like trying to open a window that has been painted shut. The mechanism existed, the will was there, but the result was always the same, slight resistance, and the question of whether the effort was worth the bruised palm. He had a voice memo app on his phone. He'd downloaded it for work, recording interviews, notes to himself, the occasional idea that arrived faster than he could type. Sometime in early November, after a dinner in which Jessica had corrected him 4 times in front of her sister, small corrections about dates and names and the plot of a movie, the kind that seem harmless individually, he opened the app while she was in the bathroom and recorded himself for 40 seconds. Not for any strategic purpose, not with any plan. Just to hear himself say, out loud, in a voice no one else would hear, that happened. That is a thing that keeps happening. He didn't delete the recording. He made another one a week later after a phone call with Daniel, which Jessica had taken in the bedroom, which she had not mentioned afterward, which he had not asked about. He was not recording her. He was recording himself, his observations, his questions, a chronology of small things that he was starting to suspect he would need to remember clearly if he ever wanted to discuss them coherently. It was the act of a man who had learned, somewhere beneath conscious thought, that his version of events would need evidence to stand. One evening, in one of those accidental intimacies that marriages produce, sitting on the couch, half watching something neither of them had chosen, legs touching, Jessica said, "Do you think we're okay?" He turned to look at her. The question seemed genuine, which surprised him. "Do you?" he said. She chewed the inside of her cheek. "I think we're in a rut." What would not a rut look like? She thought about it. She seemed to be actually thinking, which he appreciated. I don't know. More like before. When we were, I don't know. When it felt easier. He nodded. I think it started feeling harder when I told you something bothered me and you told our friends about it as a joke. She was quiet for a moment. Then, Aaron, She stopped. Started again. I didn't think that was. I was just being light about it. I know. That's kind of the thing, though. She opened her mouth, and then she went somewhere strange. Her expression shifted slightly, not guilty, not defensive, but briefly elsewhere, as though she had briefly stepped outside the room they were in. She said quietly, almost to the middle distance, "I don't know, maybe like this story or subscribe or something." He blinked. "What?" She shook her head, a quick half shake like clearing water from her ear. "Sorry, I don't know why I said that. I was just..." She stopped. Her cheeks went slightly pink. "Never mind. I don't know." Aaron looked at her for a long moment. There was something unnameable in her expression. Not guilt, not confusion exactly, but something like the face of a person who has momentarily surfaced from a dream and can't quite locate the boundary between sleep and waking. He didn't ask again. It was the kind of moment that felt too fragile to examine directly. "What were you saying?" he said gently. "About when it felt easier." She blinked. "Reoriented. I think I haven't been present the way I should be." She was choosing words carefully now, the way people do when they sense the ground may not hold. "I think maybe I've been dismissive sometimes." "Sometimes," he said. Not an accusation, just a word. She didn't respond to the word. She leaned her head back against the cushion and looked at the ceiling, and they sat there together in a silence that was, for the first time in a while, honest. He reached over and took her hand. She let him. Neither of them said anything else for a long time. It was the closest they had come to truth in months. And neither of them knew what to do with it, so they left it there on the couch between them, unnamed, and eventually they went to bed. The counselor's name was Dr. Patricia Wen, and her office had the carefully neutral decor of a space designed to belong to no one. Beige walls, a small bookshelf, a window with frosted glass that turned the light soft and directionless. Aaron had found her through his insurance website. He had not told Jessica he was going alone at first, and then he had told her, because keeping it from her felt like becoming someone he didn't want to be. Jessica agreed to go together after 3 weeks. She sat with her arms crossed, not hostilely, but with the posture of someone who was there under quiet protest and was not yet ready to fully uncross. Dr. Wen had a way of asking questions that didn't feel like questions, more like openings, small gaps in the conversation where things could fall through if you weren't careful. "What do you each feel like the other person doesn't see about you?" she asked in the second session. Jessica answered first, which Aaron noted. "I feel like Aaron sees me as a problem to be managed, like something to be monitored." Aaron kept his face neutral. "And Aaron?" He thought for a moment. "I feel like when I say something hurts, the response is usually to explain why it shouldn't hurt, or to make it smaller. Can you give an example?" He had been waiting for this. He pulled out his phone, which Dr. Wen watched with a carefully neutral expression, and opened the voice memo app. He turned the phone slightly toward the room rather than toward Jessica specifically and pressed play. The recording was from a Sunday morning in September. Just 2 minutes of audio. Jessica's voice, lighter than it was now in the room, saying, "Aaron got so sulky about the party thing. I don't know what he wants from me, honestly. I mean, yes, I'll be more careful, but I'm not going to stop having fun because he's insecure." A pause. And then further in the background, her sister Emma's voice. "He's always been sensitive. And Jessica, I know, I love him, but..." And then a door closing. He stopped it there. The silence in the room was dense. Jessica was looking at a point slightly left of his face. Her jaw had tightened. "You were recording me." "I recorded the house," he said quietly. "I was trying to document. Not you. I was trying to document what was actually happening, because every time I tried to remember, I started to doubt myself. That's..." She stopped. She was searching for a word and not finding the right one. "That's a violation of..." "What did you hear in that recording, Jessica?" She looked at him. Her eyes were careful. "You were recording. I know what I was doing. What did you hear in it?" Dr. Wen was watching both of them with the patience of someone who understood that certain things could not be rushed. Jessica uncrossed her arms. She recrossed them. She said finally, quietly, "I said I loved you. Right before, but." The silence stretched. "I didn't know I was being," she started. "I know you didn't. I was venting to my sister." "I know, that's a private Jessica. Not Sharp, just her name. I'm not angry about the recording. I'm not angry about Daniel. I'm not angry about the party. I'm trying to show you a pattern that I don't think you can see from where you're standing." She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice had lost the defensive edge, and what was beneath it was something more complicated. Not guilt, exactly, but the particular exhaustion of a person whose self-image is in the process of being revised against their will. "I didn't mean to make you feel small," she said. "I know that too. But it happened anyway. And when I tried to name it, it became a story you told at brunch." She looked at her hands. "I do that," she said, more to herself than to anyone in the room. "I know I do that. I make things manageable for myself by lightening them." Dr. Wen made a quiet note on her pad. "The problem," Aaron said, "is that when you lighten my feelings to make them manageable, they stop being my feelings. They become a character trait. I become sensitive, Aaron. You're not. I know I'm not." But that's what the room heard at brunch. She didn't argue. She looked out the frosted window at the soft, blurred light, and Aaron watched her face do something he hadn't seen in a long time. It simply held what it was feeling, without reshaping it for an audience. He didn't feel victorious. He had been clear with himself about that long before this room. He was not here to win. He was here because he had reached the point where continuing in silence was no longer a form of patience. It was a form of erasure. When they left the office, they walked to their separate cars. They had driven separately, which had not been discussed and which said everything. He sat in his car for a while before starting it. He did not cry, because he had cried about this quietly and alone over the months of recording voice memos and eating dinners and sleeping in the same bed with his back to someone he had once fallen asleep facing. He had already done his grieving in private. What he felt now was something quieter and more final, a settling, like a building whose foundation has shifted and has finally, gently, completely, come to rest in its new position. He started the car. The thing about Jessica Miller was that she was not a woman without self-awareness. That was what made the months that followed, in some ways, more painful than a simpler recklessness would have been. She moved into the guest room in March, which was framed publicly, to her sister, to her colleagues, to herself. "As a space thing, we both just need more room. It's actually healthier than it sounds." She genuinely believed some version of this because Jessica had a gift for finding the framing that allowed her to remain, in her own accounting, a reasonable person. It was not malicious. It was the natural self-defense of someone whose understanding of herself was grounded in being warm, relatable, and fundamentally good, and who therefore could not afford to dwell too long on evidence to the contrary. Daniel and Claire had broken up in February. Jessica mentioned this to Aaron once, casually, "The way you mention a weather change." He said nothing. She found to her own surprise that she did not reach out to Daniel. This was a thing she noticed with a quiet satisfaction, which she filed mentally under C. Nothing was ever actually happening. She was not wrong, but the file was missing some documents. At work, a younger colleague named Priya asked her once, idly, if she was okay. She'd seemed distracted lately. Jessica said, "Marriage stuff, you know." And Priya made a sympathetic face, and Jessica said, "I think we just grew in different directions." And she felt the cleanness of the phrase, even as she recognized, somewhere beneath the clean surface, that it was not quite accurate. Growing in different directions implied a mutual organic divergence. It did not account for the specific texture of Aaron sitting in a counselor's office, playing a recording of her calling him insecure. She thought about that recording more than she admitted, not the act of recording. She had resolved to be angry about that, and she was. But the anger had an uncomfortable underside, because what he had recorded was real. That was the problem with documentation. It was inert. It didn't care about context or intention. It just sat there, being what it was. She called her mother in April, not to discuss Aaron specifically, just to talk, to fill the particular silence of the guest room with a familiar voice. Her mother asked how things were, and Jessica said, "Hard," which was the most honest single word she'd found in months. "He loves you, though," her mother said. "That man has always loved you." "I know. Do you?" She didn't answer that. She steered the conversation towards something easier. Aaron, meanwhile, was doing what Aaron had always done with difficulty. He was absorbing it, not suppressing. He had learned, through the months of voice memos and then through 4 more sessions with Dr. Wen, that suppression and processing were not the same thing. He was reading more, running more, having conversations with his college friend Brendan that went longer and deeper than they had in years. He was becoming, slowly and without fanfare, someone who took up slightly more space than he had before. He was not happy. But happiness was not what he was working toward right now. He was working toward legibility, toward a self he could read clearly, without the constant interference of managing someone else's comfort. He deleted the voice memos in May, not dramatically, not all at once. He deleted them one by one over 3 evenings, listening to each one briefly before pressing delete. By the end, what remained was not evidence but experience. A sequence of moments he now carried internally, where they would stay without needing external storage. The house was on the market by June. They had agreed on this without much argument, which itself felt like a data point about the state of things. They were civil. They were even, on good days, kind to each other in the distant, careful way of people who share a complicated history and have decided not to live inside it anymore. Jessica planted tomatoes in the back garden that summer. She wasn't sure why. She had never been much of a gardener, but she found herself in the garden in the early mornings in the oblique light, doing something that required attention and patience and produced something real. She would tell Priya much later, a little bit sorry. More than a little, actually. But sorry was not a thing she had yet found a way to say to the specific person she owed it to, and so it remained general, ambient, more like weather than message. Aaron bought a small apartment across town. He painted one wall in the living room a deep charcoal gray, which everyone who visited said was a choice, and which he found every morning, studying. The house sold in August, which required them to be in the same room together for the signing, a conference room at the title company, fluorescent light, cups of complimentary water in small paper cones. Their real estate agent, a cheerful woman named Sandra who did not fully understand what she was sitting in the middle of, talked too quickly and made small jokes that Aaron and Jessica both smiled at in the thin, performed way of people maintaining composure. Afterward, they stood on the sidewalk outside. It was an ordinary afternoon, overcast, mild, the kind of day that didn't ask anything of you. Jessica had her sunglasses up on her head even though there was no sun. She was looking at a crack in the sidewalk for a moment before she looked at him. "Well," she said. "Well," he said. She looked like she was deciding something. Then, "I've been thinking about what you played in that session, what I said to Emma." He waited. "I've thought about it a lot, actually." "Okay." She looked past him briefly, then back. "I want to say something, but I don't want it to seem like I'm doing it because I need something from you." "I know the difference," he said. She nodded. She believed him. That was one thing that had never been in question. Aaron had always been able to hear the difference between something genuine and something performed. It had been, at times, inconvenient. "I made you smaller," she said, "not on purpose. But I did it, and I think I knew, not consciously, but somewhere, and I kept doing it anyway because it was easier than feeling like I was with someone who was asking things of me." He looked at her. There was no heat in him, which was not the same thing as coldness. He had moved past heat a long time ago. "What things?" he asked. She thought. "To be seen, I think. Not by other people. By me." She tilted her head slightly, the way she did when she was being honest. "That's harder." He nodded. "It is. I don't expect," she started. "I know." A city bus went past. Someone on a bicycle, the ordinary motion of a day that had no idea it was significant. "Are you okay?" she asked. And she meant it simply, the way people sometimes manage to mean things simply after long periods of complicated meaning. "I'm getting there," he said. "Are you?" She took a breath. "Let it out. I'm learning what I did wrong, which is uncomfortable, but probably useful." He smiled, just slightly. Not warmly, not coldly, the smile of a man who has let someone be honest and found it neither too late nor enough, and has made a kind of peace with the distance between those two things. "That seems right," he said. She put her sunglasses on, though it was still overcast. Maybe that was its own kind of honesty, the need to have something between herself and the moment. "Take care of yourself, Aaron. You too, Jess." She walked toward her car. He walked toward his. Neither of them looked back, not because they were being strategic about it, but because there was, somehow, nothing left to see, just two people walking toward separate futures on an ordinary overcast afternoon, carrying the specific weight of a marriage that had not ended in one dramatic moment, but in the accumulated result of all the small moments when it could have been different, and wasn't. He sat in his car. He thought about the wall he painted charcoal gray in his apartment. He thought about the morning light on it. He thought about how he had stood in front of it the first morning, coffee in hand, and felt something unfamiliar. Not happiness, but its quieter cousin, the sense of being, for the first time in a long time, correctly located. He started the car. He drove home. The tomatoes in the back garden went unpicked when the house closed. The new owners, a young couple with a dog, pulled out the plants in September. Jessica didn't know this. She had taken a single photograph of the garden in late July, on a morning when the light was good, and she kept it in a folder on her phone that she opened sometimes. When she needed to remember that she was capable of tending things carefully, Aaron kept no photographs. He kept the wall.